Dan is the name of the man who runs the Men Need to Be Heard YouTube channel, a channel that recently hit 100,000 subscribers, and congratulations for that, Dan. I'm a subscriber. I've been so for, I believe, close to 2 years now. And he did a recent video and ended it in such a way that I've seen him end many of his videos. And I can't really argue with the content. I'm not saying that he's wrong. I'm just saying that I would prefer that he be wrong. I want him to be wrong. And we'll see in this particular video that I'm going to share and give some comment on, and probably even end up with some other words from him from a different video. So let's take a look.
Gentlemen, the meltdowns continue. Are you that bad? Well, sweetheart, the honest answer is we don't know and have no way of knowing. But to men, the fact that you're alone at 40 and trying to claim that you're a catch because you can cook and have a big house is a pretty good indication that for us men, you might be. No offense, but if that's all you're bringing to the table, then it's easy to understand why you're alone. Because I know this will shock most women, but we men can cook too and have a big house of our own. So we don't need yours. Yours, which odds are you got a divorce after you broke up your marriage because you thought you were going to be able to do better. Well, darling, I genuinely feel sorry for you, but odds are you've had more than a few chances to get with good men. Good men who probably asked you out, who might have wanted to marry you and have children with you, but who you also decided weren't good enough, weren't tall enough, or didn't make enough money. So now you're hitting the wall, and those men you rejected are now the ones rejecting you. Yeah, I know, not fun, but it is a result of your choices. And maybe, ladies, you should have thought of that before you made them.
You know, all these women didn't use the same music for their videos. Dan likely added that in for effect, and it's working.
Oh, darling, with all due respect, God's not coming to help you. The only one that can actually help you is you yourself. Because as I just said, your situation now is the result of your past decisions. And you can either accept that and change, or you can continue to do what most women will do. Blame the men and avoid taking any accountability or responsibility. Or begging God, or really anyone else you can think of, to somehow change it. Sorry, darling, but the change needs to come from you. All of you. And I doubt it will. Not now, not ever. And if holding women accountable, if telling them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear, which, let's be honest, is only that it's not their fault, it's never their fault, is somehow hating women, then so be it. Though I'd argue that those who don't hold women accountable hate them far, far more than I ever could. The bottom line is what we're seeing in this video is going to be exploding. In fact, it already is. In another 5 years, close to half of all women will be alone, childless, with no future, no prospects, no man. And that number is only going to go up. Why? Because women chose to make it that way. Chose to make it that way when they ran around saying they only want a guy who's 6'5" in finance with blue eyes and a trust fund. Make it that way when they run around saying that any man who wasn't 6 feet tall with six-pack abs, a six-figure income, and a 6-inch you-know-what isn't worthy enough to date, let alone be in a relationship with. When they chose to make it that way every time they make a video saying they're strong and independent and don't need no man. Chose to make it that way every time they've screamed, it's all men till it's no men. Sorry, ladies. All I can say to you is, You really should have thought all this through before you started doing that. Sure, it felt good at the time. Sure, it got your brain and ovaries swimming in dopamine to run around trashing men 24/7, 365, which most of you did and many of you are still doing. But that comes at a cost of men hearing you, hearing every single word you said, and seeing everything you did, and coming to the realization just how toxic and dangerous you are, and that the best option, in fact, the only option available to them, was to walk away, which is exactly what they've done and are doing. So while you can wish it weren't this way, this is your reality now and your future going forward. You better get used to it, because now that men have left, they aren't coming back anytime soon.
And that's the part that gets me when he ends with such a definitive statement about the future, how it's not going to get better anytime soon, or he'll say something like that. Can't really argue with him because he brings the receipts. A lot of large YouTubers who talk about this topic do so. They'll mention articles, factoids, show a lot of testimonials like we just saw with these YouTube and YouTube shorts and TikTok videos. So they have data. They bring some receipts, but they all seem to leave one thing out. And I can't promise that I'll be first on this issue. I'm definitely not first. Obviously, I'm commenting on something that Dan has already put out, but I can promise to be different. And the one receipt that everyone seems to be leaving out is this. As someone in IT, when I can't intuitively figure something out, whether it be hardware or software, what I'll do is I'll go to the documentation. Well, when it comes to humanity and relationships, what is the documentation for that? To me, this is the documentation. This is the inerrant word of God, 100% true. And he used man to put his word into writing. And it is God who created people and humanity. He created family. And family is actually the first human institution that God created for people. It's from that institution that we're supposed to learn about worship, and discipleship and instruction begins there. So let's take a look at a few tidbits from the Bible. Particularly, let's go to, we're going to be in Proverbs today. Proverbs 21. It's better to live alone in the corner of an attic than with a quarrelsome wife in a lovely home. God liked that so nice, he wrote it twice, because you go a few more chapters to Proverbs 25, verse 24. Same thing. It's better to live alone in the corner of an attic than with a quarrelsome wife in a lovely home. Go back to Proverbs 21. This time, instead of verse 9, we'll go to verse 19. It's better to live alone in the desert than with a quarrelsome, complaining wife. You go to Proverbs 27, verse 15. A quarrelsome wife is as annoying as a constant dripping on a rainy day. And let's take it one more to Proverbs 17, verse 1. Better a dry crust eaten in peace than a house filled with feasting and conflict. So it's better to have a piece of bread by yourself in peace than steak with conflict. Now, God could have had anybody write that stuff. Why did he choose Solomon? I was just thinking about that recently. I mean, he could have had anybody transcribe these words. Why particularly Solomon? Proverbs is traditionally attributed, the author of it is traditionally attributed to be King Solomon, the king of Israel. Why did God choose the king of Israel to transcribe these words? Well, I believe God is intentional, and he chose King Solomon because on some level he figured that King Solomon would identify with some of these feelings. Now, why would the king of Israel identify with these feelings? I know he had a lot of women in his life, but nevertheless, you would think the women in his life would be on their P's and Q's dealing with the king of Israel, because the king could, if he's displeased, at a minimum, tell these women, you're no longer welcome in the palace. Be gone. You've probably seen that little meme where some guy goes, she belongs to the streets. Well, the king of Israel, King Solomon, could literally send these women to the streets. If he's being charitable, if he's in a particularly perturbed mood, he could just say, off with their head, right? Who's going to stop him? He's the king. And yet, the women in his life, the modern women of his day, still pushed his buttons to the point where he had these feelings that I'm able to read about thousands of years later. I would think if I'm a woman reading this years later, thousands of years later, I would think there must be something in our software that allows us to behave this way. So it's incumbent upon us to use whatever autonomy that we have to avoid the temptation. And to be fair, King Solomon's father was King David, and he had a famous flaw where he had an affair with a married woman named Bathsheba, and to add insult to injury, he even made it so that Bathsheba's husband would be put into a vulnerable position in battle, making it easy for him to be killed in battle, and he was. So I, as a man reading this thousands of years later, can say there must be something in my software as a man that can allow me to behave this way, particularly as a man who gains power. So it's incumbent upon me to do what I can to fight that urge. But I don't see very many people reading the Bible that way. In fact, it didn't occur to me until recently to ask myself, why did God use Solomon to write these words? Before I just read it as, ooh, this is interesting information. But then I asked myself again, why did he choose Solomon to do this? And it's scary to think that, hey, here's a king and he's still dealing with this. And it may seem like I'm picking on the women, not necessarily. I'm bringing this up because I've learned from channels like Dan's that 70% of divorces are initiated by the women. On a low number, I hear as much as 80%. And I'd be willing to bet good money that 70, 80%, the majority of them are not for biblical reasons. To me, there are only two. That's what I was taught. Abandonment and infidelity. And if you say, well, what about abuse? When you really think about it, abuse is abandonment of the marital vows. Abuse is, you say infidelity. Abuse, you're being unfaithful to the vows of marriage. So abuse still falls under those two categories of abandonment and infidelity. That's why I bring that up. We just had Thanksgiving recently, and I couldn't help but think, it occurred to me, something that I was thankful for was having a front row seat to the relationship of my grandparents on my mother's side. And I see it as a gift because I'm learning that over half of the kids from Generation Z are growing up without their parents being married in the household. So what example are they going to have? And I think the results that we're getting in America are not good. But the example that I saw was a couple who had been married for 70 years. They had 8 children. And I never, ever heard my grandmother say a disparaging word about my grandfather when he was present or when he was not present. Likewise, I never, ever, ever heard my grandfather say a bad thing about my grandma when she was not around or when she was around. Never undermined her, and vice versa. I don't know if they consciously did that, if it was consciously habitual, or if it was just habitual because in an unconscious way. Maybe they just picked up on that from their parents and people who were older in their life when they were coming up. I wish they explained to me how they were so successful. But you hear the saying, more is caught than taught. And I caught a lot of this stuff. Some of it I caught later than I wanted to. Some of it I'm catching after their deaths, quite frankly. It didn't occur to me until here recently, actually, how I knew something was out of bounds with a woman that I was dating in life. And I was going back really to that relationship with my grandparents. If a woman said or did something that I just felt was odd, I couldn't quite put it into words. Now I know the reason why it felt odd to me was because I could not imagine my grandmother saying or doing that to or with my grandfather. And that's why I knew it was out of bounds. Couldn't explain it then, but I knew that's what was happening. You hear people say all couples argue. I don't find that in Scripture. And quite frankly, I didn't see it in my grandparents' relationship. I know that's an odd thing to say, but I didn't see it. They never raised their voices to each other. I know they were capable of raising their voices because I heard it, but it was never to each other. Whenever they raised their voice, it was to us, the kids and the grandkids in the family, but not to each other. And if they did it, I think I would have heard it. Their house was not that big. My grandparents' relationship, if I had to put it into a single sentence, was more happy house, happy spouse, happy house. Whereas today we hear the saying, happy wife, happy life. And that just always struck me as odd. When I first heard it, it was, I think, from my father when I was married. And it seemed to be a way to excuse behavior that was coming towards me from my spouse. And I didn't like that at all. I just knew it was wrong. I never said this before, but my mom and her 5 sisters kind of shaped my vision of a future mate for myself. They were all thin in their youth and had long natural hair. There were no extensions. Wigs existed. I don't recall seeing them use those. They never smoked. They never drank. And I rarely heard any profanity coming from them. So they were my model, along with their friends and even the in-laws. My Uncle Eddie had a wife who had the same kind of look as my mom and her sisters. And so I thought I would end up with someone like that. I thought, quite frankly, that was the majority of women on some level. But at the same time, I'm glad that they weren't like a lot of what I see today. But at the same time, I was unprepared because of them for the awakening of what was really out there. Without showing pictures of them to give you an idea of what they might have looked like, they kind of reminded me of Claire Huxtable on some level. That look. They weren't, lawyers like the character Claire Huxtable from The Cosby Show, but they had that kind of look. She would fit in, put it that way. Claire Huxtable would fit in with that crowd, with my mom, her friends, and her sisters. And even the female cousins on that side of the family. A lot of people liked that show when I was coming up. They liked The Cosby Show. I didn't. I couldn't really explain why. I can now. And here's the reason why I didn't like that show as much as a lot of other people. Looking back now, I can see the reason why I didn't like it is everybody else on that show, everybody on the show, with the exception of maybe the people who played the grandparents, everybody else on the show at some point played the fool of the episode. Everybody, except for Claire Huxtable. Claire could do no wrong. Claire was always right. And in some ways, Claire was the head of the household. In some ways, she was the man of the house. And that's why I didn't like it. I couldn't quite explain it that way. And if I tried to, I wouldn't know how to do it without sounding chauvinistic. But I just knew something was wrong about that. Claire Huxtable was a feminist. And I didn't know too much about that word when I was watching the show when it was originally being aired. I do today. And I know why it's a danger today. I think some women are coming to recognize that too. Some are brave enough to say, hey, all of you who keep promoting this feminist stuff and I don't need a man stuff, can y'all stop being so loud, because some of us, we actually do want a man. It used to be on TV that the father knew best, the wife was supportive, and somewhere in the episode, the children would learn a lesson. Then it became the mother knows best, the father is supportive, and somewhere in the episode, the kids learn a lesson. That's what I saw on The Cosby Show. Today, it's the kids know best, the mother is supportive, and the father is the fool that everybody gets to make fun of. He's the idiot. He can do no right. So if I didn't like it in Claire Huxtable's day, you can imagine I don't like today's stuff, which is why I don't watch too many new TV series. My grandmother was like salt. My grandfather was pepper. The salt never wanted to be pepper, and the pepper never wanted to be salt. On some level, I think they knew, I'm salt, I can't be pepper. I'm pepper, I can't be salt. But together, they created a flavor for themselves and the family that neither one could have done very well on their own. And I wish more people saw that. That's why I'm taking the time to make this video. I wish my situation were an oddity, but I just feel like another statistic. One that I was really trying to avoid. One that I want others to avoid. My parents are divorced. They have been so since I was like before 2 years old. And but one thing I do admire about their remarriages is each one has been remarried for 40 years. So their longevity is something I wanted to duplicate, but the content of their marriage is not something I wanted to duplicate. That stuff I said about my grandparents never saying a disparaging word about the other one, when the other one was present or not around, that I can't say that about my mom and dad and their new marriages. Can't say that. And I didn't want to duplicate any of the content of their marriages. I just wanted to duplicate the longevity. I didn't respect that disrespect that I was seeing in my mind. I did respect what I saw in my grandparents' relationship. So they had that happy wife, happy life type stuff. Same thing with Heathcliff Huxtable. And if that's what you got to do in order to have longevity, then I guess I'll never be married again. Because I just don't respect that at all. It's not. It doesn't follow God's biblical order, and it doesn't work. I just didn't see it working. I'll say this. My grandparents were married for 70 years. 70 plus years. They had 8 children. I never heard them say this, but I've thought it. And I have to think on some level they thought this. We're married for 70 years. We had 8 kids. How come none of our 8 kids can be married for at least 10 years with the same person and have at least 2 children. None of them. 0 for 8 were married for at least 10 years and had at least 2 children with the same person. Now, in their defense, this no-fault divorce was becoming a thing in all 50 states as those 8 kids were becoming adults. But just because something is available doesn't mean you have to partake in it. It became available. My grandparents didn't partake in it. And I'm so glad they didn't. I just can't imagine my grandparents being in their 60s or 70s and they're separated and I got to go visit each one individually. I'm bringing up all this stuff because as an engineer, I look at problems and I want to solve them. And this is a big problem. In America, we're becoming one of the most unwed nations on earth. Particularly amongst black people in America, we are the most unwed people in the nation. And I really don't think that ought to be a trophy we want to go home with. We have these, things called situationships. I'd never heard that until I started following this kind of content like Dan makes and seeing the videos where people bring that up as a topic. Just this year, in the past few months, I'm learning about a new term, new to me, called cuffing season. Now that apparently is where you virtually get handcuffed with someone just for the winter months so you can have someone to snuggle up to and watch movies with and introduce to family members at Thanksgiving and Christmas so you can confuse them. This is your new boo thing. You can wake up on Christmas morning with matching pajamas and exchange gifts with each other. Maybe they stick around through Valentine's Day so you can do that together. But then after that, you split and go your separate ways so you can have hot girl summer and get ready for that. It's not a flex at all. I don't think your parents, when they were holding you for the first time, thought, one day I hope this child grows up to be in a situationship where they can have some kids out of wedlock and maybe one day participate in cuffing season. You hear people say they don't want to settle. I'm telling you, if you're in a situationship, if you're participating in cuffing season, you are settling for a facsimile of what you really want. You are settling for a bad copy of what your parents want for you, of what God wanted for you when He created you. So get out of that. It's not a flex. If we don't change things around, I get the feeling the singles cruises of the future are going to include a lot of people over 40, like some of the women we saw in the video that Dan shared. And they shouldn't be. No woman over 40 should be qualified to be on a singles cruise. She should be spoken for many years by the time she's 40, unless she got divorced for a biblical reason or unless she's a widow. Those are the only ways you should be qualified to be on the singles cruise as a woman over 40. That's just the way it ought to be. You do not want to be like these women we saw in the video at the beginning. So I'm not saying that Dan is wrong. I'm just saying I want him to be wrong. And I think he wants to be wrong too. It's just that he is aware of the reality of the negatives on a day-to-day basis because he talks about these topics on a day-to-day basis. So he brings the receipts. I can't argue with what he brings. I can't say he's wrong. I'm just saying I want him to be wrong. And what's it going to take for him to be wrong? We didn't get here overnight. Well, I think it's going to take a miracle. And who specializes in miracles? The author of this book, the creator of the universe, the creator of people, the creator of humanity, the creator of families. You need to read it like our relationships, like our families, like our lives depend on it, because they do. Today, do you have an example of people having some longevity without arguing a lot, without disparaging the other person in front of family, in front of friends, or behind their back with family and friends? Grandparents didn't do that. I only heard good things about my grandfather from my grandmother when my grandfather wasn't around, and vice versa. That's where it's at. They didn't come out and teach that except through their example. But the only example some other people are going to have is by reading this themselves and sticking to this. It's going to seem like fantasy. I had a living, breathing example, and I had a front row seat to see it happen. A lot of it is in the hands of the women, because they're the ones that are starting the separation, the termination of the relationships, of the marriages. If you don't want to end up like these women, or you don't want your kids to end up like these women at the beginning of the video, take heed to some of the stuff I just said. Take heed to the book. I didn't write this. You want to be mad at the content? I didn't write it. And then let's see what Dan has to say here at the end.
Men are avoiding marriage because modern marriage has become legally dangerous to them. Family court is a minefield. False allegations are literally destroying millions of men's lives every single year. Divorce laws punish men, punish providers. Child support has been weaponized. Paternity fraud is completely ignored. And fatherhood is mocked. One bad accusation can take a man from homeowner and father to homeless and destitute in mere minutes, without him even knowing or having the chance to defend himself.
This is your first time watching? Consider hitting that thumbs up button and subscribing. Merry Christmas. Maybe I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.